I was like, this is so sad, like the bird's gonna die. And I was like so upset over one little bird. And now it's like funny.
So just as a disclaimer before the video, it is going to cover topics that are activating in nature. So like violence in the media, and then we did like talk about school shootings, so like gun violence a bit, and just some other things that might be activating for some people, so that's something to be mindful of. And yeah, so enjoy. This is my first discussion video, and today we're going to be talking about media violence and the effects that it has on us. This is a guided discussion. This is my close friend Lauren.
Hi.
She doesn't know really like too much about what we're going to be talking about today. I gave her like the topic, but we'll see how it goes. It should be fun. What do you define as violent media, Lauren?
Anything that desensitizes you to violence, where you're just watching someone go through pain or inflict pain, and it's not like, oh my god, this is horrible. It's just like you're just seeing it, and it just is.
Yeah, I agree with that. The idea for this video actually came to me because I went to like Google Trends, and two of like the top searches, one was FBI Most Wanted. It's a show about just like criminals. They're on their 3rd season, and it was like a recap of the most recent episode. It was called like Incel, and it was about a murderous incel that was like going around and killing people. I'm not very familiar with the show, I've never watched it, but thought that was funny. And then the other popular search, or another one, was just like Elle Fanning and then Death of Conrad Roy, which is another show like related to crime, violence. It was based on like a real life situation in which a girl named Michelle Carter, she basically like convinced her boyfriend to follow through with his like suicide plan, and yeah, she was charged with manslaughter. So it's like we have this like fascination with crime that's just like very ingrained into our society, I would say. And even from my personal experience, I would say that like it's popular media, like we watch it for a reason. What is your favorite movie?
My favorite movie is The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou.
Do you have a favorite game?
I don't know, probably.
Destiny.
My favorite video game is either Assassin's Creed or Batman Arkham City.
I think that the main reason we do, or some of us, most of us, develop a fixation and joy from watching crime shows and like violent games, whatever, is because you don't get to see that in real life. A news outlet may tell the story, but they're not going to show the story. Obviously, a murder wasn't recorded because, you know, how are you going to get away with murder if it's recorded?
Right.
And the only way we can see it is when it's staged and, you know, produced into entertainment. I think the reason the news produces their crime stories or publishes, like any publishers publish the way they do, I feel like they often try to make the criminals seem more monstrous than humane.
Right.
And I think it's a way of
dehumanizing them almost.
Dehumanizing for the purpose of giving us a sense of normality. Like, our brains want to put a reason to things when sometimes our brains aren't capable of understanding why other brains would ever do such a thing. It's easier to think a monster would kill his daughter than a dad of 8 years would kill his daughter.
Right.
And yeah, it's just easier for...
I feel like you touched on a really good point there. It's that like, it's so easy to view things through like a black and white lens of like, okay, he was a murderer, why did he do it? And like we want to jump to like the most easy conclusion, like, oh, he was like dad of 8, but actually his wife just divorced him and he lost his job. Like we want to look for like easy scapegoats instead of like really like understanding the causes behind things. And I think that's like a little dangerous in itself. From personal experience, like I like enjoy consuming like violent media. Like one of my favorite genres is horror. Growing up I played like GTA and I didn't really think too much of it, but I don't know, like maybe there's something to it. Like my favorite movie too is like Hunger Games, and it's literally about like kids killing other kids, and you know.
Yeah. So I personally never really had that violence fixation. But I did have a fixation with gore in general. Maybe it wasn't like inflicted by another person, but just like, you know, this one movie I loved as a kid, it was a very graphic, maybe I shouldn't have watched it as a kid, but it was a very graphic scene of a man being eaten by a bear.
Mm.
And I do just find a lot of interest in gore or just shocking movies. I find them so much more entertaining than a movie about emotions or just normal things that we could see.
Right, I would agree with that. Like, that's like why I keep going back to horror movies. It's like, although they scare me, it's like they make you feel something, and like they keep you on your toes. And other than that, I'm honestly not sure like why we keep coming back to them. But
yeah, I guess it's just you won't see it otherwise. I just think it's really interesting to see how we value what crimes deserve what punishments.
I do think that is interesting. Like, I know with the Michelle Carter case, which I was talking about earlier, very briefly, she committed like manslaughter by like, basically she was just like telling her boyfriend like, yeah, like you should go through with it.
If you don't want to live, just die.
Yeah, that was like a whole thing. And she had like, I think it was like 15 months and then like probation. And so I think it's like interesting like how we like weigh things as well. What do you think the most common like cause of just like murder is? Weapons, like what do you think?
Oh, weapons, guns.
Guns?
Guns.
Okay.
Guns, maybe if that's not correct, stabbing.
It is, okay, so it's 74% of murder is committed with firearms, and then 14%, or no, sorry, 11% is committed with like knives and then cutting instruments. And then a very like small percentage is like committed with like things like drowning, strangulation, fire, and all those
Beating
like
them up,
those
maybe.
extremes that were presented in the like media a lot. Like we see it in movies all the time. Like I don't know, I can think of like several movies where like I've seen like they light some like have a lighter and like throw it into like gas and then big explosion, or like they strangle like and then drown.
Yeah,
their
that I
victim
do
as
definitely.
well.
Because I guess in a movie, it's not as interesting to watch someone go bang and then they're dead.
Yeah.
Okay, I would say something that I have noticed, which is a little off topic from this, is that I have, because of movies and stuff, I've become very desensitized to killing people with guns. There'll be a movie that opens up with like a guy just firing at 3 people, and you're like, woo, like this is an exciting movie, and it's not like, oh my god.
Right.
You know?
I would agree with that statement. It's like, I used to be, like, I remember, like, childhood, my dad put on, like, Child Play, you know, the Chucky movie, and, like, I was so scared of it. Like, I, like, hid underneath, like, a pull-out bed, and, like, I would cover my eyes, and I was just so scared of, like, anything that had to do with, like, violence and gore, and it just, like, really freaked me out. Like, I literally was such a sensitive child.
Me too.
I cried during, like, the Earth movie, with like the polar bears and then like the whales and the elephants. I cried because like a baby elephant got eaten. And now I'm at the point where it's like I can watch horror movies and they don't faze me.
Yeah.
And I think that's a little scary.
I remember in first grade when there was the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, my first grade teacher was playing a video on the board about what was happening and why this is bad and why the companies that let that happen should be accountable, whatever, what it was doing to our marine life. And I remember seeing a video of a bird trying to fly, but it couldn't because it had a bunch of oil. And I was like, this is so sad, like the bird's gonna die. And I was like so upset over one little bird. And now it's like funny in context.
Funny.
It's funny in context to see a person get shot in a movie.
Okay, I see. We're just constantly being cranked, like, news that is, like, devastating, that at a point you do become desensitized. That's just,
especially in our lifetime.
Yeah, just because, like, with, like, social media, like, it's just so hard to avoid, like, news that is distressing. And I feel like if we were to, like, take it all in, like, empathize with each and everything, like you just get burnt out so easily.
Yeah, and that's I think what happened with COVID too. It's like you'd see the death count And when it went from 1 million to 2 million, that didn't mean anything to me. But that's a whole other million people dead.
Right.
You know?
I think that's another thing too, is just like it's hard to view numbers as like, I don't know, as distressing as they are. Like it's much more like personal anecdotes are that much more impactful, I would say. We do need to be like thinking about the material that we're like taking in. And I think that news outlets could be doing more to like using disclaimers of like, hey, just so you guys know, like this violent crime did occur, it happened, but it's not the norm. Narrative that's being told is like, yeah, the world's kind of like a scary place and a lot of bad stuff happens. Which is true, bad stuff does happen, but it's not as common as you would think. We've kind of discussed like the consequences of like having violent media thrown at us. Another one is like, do you think it makes people more aggressive?
I think it makes people's humor more aggressive for sure. But then on the other hand, I think that there's a rise of a certain niche of a younger type of person, maybe like 15 to 25, who will develop an obsession with guns and violence and wishes so badly to kill things. And not always do they end up killing a person, but I do feel like that's the type of people who get watched out for in school, and you know, we watch on them because we don't want them to do the unthinkable, you know.
Right. And speaking of, my dad says this story about how in his generation they didn't really have school shootings, and it gets me thinking. I'm like, okay, well, what's causing this shift? And I'm thinking violent media has to be playing a part in this. I watch horror movies pretty regularly. I wouldn't consider myself very aggressive, but I do think it like can be a risk factor.
I think that there's also a shift in the levels of anxiety children experience. So I think a mix of anxiety and how deep into media, because of course there's always like, you know, virus-filled websites full of tons of awful things you can watch, and it's about the amount of time you spend and how deep you really go.
Something that I like heard you say was like you're talking about like anxiety, and I would say that's definitely something that's like on the rise. It's it's the most common mental illness.
Sometimes I feel that like I have a pretty healthy level of anxiety and I'm not like perfect. I'll still have my like sometimes days long periods of just excessive anxiety, and I still think that I have some of the least anxiety than some of my peers.
Right. And I think that is like alarming, like the way in which we're seeing just like anxiety rates just like going up and up and up.
Two historical events that I think got me very emotionally connected to how bad violence is, and that I don't like seeing people in pain. I mean, obviously I never did, but you know, I would see it in movies and it didn't make me feel anything.
Right.
Is watching Auschwitz or just concentration camps in general, and then 9/11. I feel like those were two things that were very deeply covered in school, and those would make me feel very emotional and really make me feel like I want everyone to be safe in this world.
The big one for me was like Stoneman Douglas, just because we grew up in Florida and we had a personal connection.
Yes, I'm from the people here who went to Stoneman Douglas.
Okay. I just knew of like a friend who had like a mutual friend, basically, is what it boils down to. And so it's like in those situations, it is a bit harder to wrap your head around those things because these are complex topics. And I don't know. I think that like a great thing we could start doing is just like educating ourselves more on the way these things come about and the statistics behind them. Like, do your research. I'm urging everyone to start being more mindful of what you're watching and like the effects it could be having on you.
I would say something that I would urge, I guess, that I've like discovered within my own brain in this conversation, is that in order to make numbers more impactful, because I do feel like we live in a world of numbers and statistics, and everyone thinks they can know what's up by reading a couple statistics, is that you have to have an emotional appeal. I actually wrote about this for my my papers on appealing people to learn about climate change, is that numbers don't mean anything and
they don't paint a full picture. Well, that is all. Thank you for joining us today. Feel free to drop your personal theories as to like what your thoughts are on how media is affecting us, and
Who is to blame? Are there any people to blame here?
right. Are there any ways we can mitigate this? Like, if you have any ideas as to like how we can, drop them. Like, this should be like a learning space.
We are all academics trying to discuss.
Right. So they're trying to expand our minds.
Yes.
We don't have to be academics to expand our minds.